There are many brands and sizes of soundboards, but they all basically work the same. Soundboards take multiple signals and mix them together to get one signal that's sent to the speakers. A soundboard consists of two basic channels, input and output, and a soundboard size is classified by the number of channels. Here is an 8-channel soundboard, a 24-channel, and a 40-channel soundboard. Basically, each one of these are the same, with the only difference being that the 40-channel board has more inputs than the 8. Each channel strip is exactly the same as the next. If you're looking to purchase a new soundboard, one thing you'll have to think about how many channels you're going to need. So make a list of all the things you want to plug in, such as a piano, drums, microphones. Every item will equal one channel. For instance, a piano with a left and right will need 2 channels. A drum set could have up to 10 channels, depending on how many drums you want to mic. Some will just use one microphone over the top of the set. Others will mic the snare drum, the kick drum, and then one over the top. So add all those things up, and that will give you how many channels you're going to need. And give yourself a little extra for expansion. So if you've added them up, you've got 14, put 4 more on there, or 6 more, depending on how much expansion you feel you might have. Let's get started with the individual channel strip. The topmost knob is usually the gain knob or the trim knob. And what this knob does is it regulates the amount of signal that passes through this channel. It's like the main valve on a plumbing system. It regulates how much signal that you want to go through this channel strip. Next, depending on your soundboard, it could be an equalizer or auxiliary send. Now the auxiliary sends, or aux sends, can be a little bit confusing. They're for sending the channel signal to another place. They're usually used for stage monitors, reverb, effects, or to send the signal to a cry room or speakers that you've got run throughout the building, restrooms or hallways. And depending on how big your soundboard is, you could have 2 to up to 12 auxiliary sends. There are 2 different types of auxiliary sends. There's the post fader and the pre-fader. Post meaning after the fader, and pre, of course, meaning before the fader. Most soundboards are going to have a post fader, although you see here we have a pre-fader button on these 3 and 4. Now what the pre-fader is great for is stage monitors. You can have a separate mix, a stage monitor mix and the main mix. Now how this works, no matter where your faders are at, your channel faders are at, they could be all the way up and all the way down, it doesn't matter. It's not going to change the auxiliary send mix. So that's why it's great for stage monitors. You have one mix for your house speakers, so what your congregation hears, and you have a mix that is for your stage monitors. Say for instance, you have a piano player and they want to hear a little bit more piano coming out of their monitor. In a pre-fader auxiliary send, you can turn that knob a little higher, turn that volume up, and it's not going to affect what everyone else is going to hear in the congregation. It's not going to affect your main mix. And the same thing with your main mix. You can turn up the piano fader and it's not going to increase the monitor mix. So it's really nice. It's an independent mixing channels that you can, no matter where your fader is at, it doesn't matter, your auxiliary sends are always going to have a signal coming through. On the post fade, it's a little different because if your fader's all the way down, you're not going to get any signal out of that auxiliary send at all. As you bring it up, as you increase that fader, that volume on the fader, you're going to increase the auxiliary send volume as well. So it directly relates to how high you have your channel fader on that channel. So if your channel fader is high, you're going to get a higher volume out of your auxiliary send. If it's low, you're going to get a lower volume out of your auxiliary send. The equalizer, or EQ, is used to shape the sound. If you want to pull out frequencies. If you're having a problem with feedback, this is how you take care of feedback in individual channels. You want to add a little bit or subtract a little bit of the tone quality. This is where you do it at. Let's take a moment to explain the EQ a little more in depth and frequencies, sound frequencies. Well, audible sound is broken up into three categories: low, mid, and high frequency. And because we're human, we have to put some sort of a unit of measurement, just like inches or feet. We have 20 hertz, which is the lowest audible frequency, although I don't think really anybody can actually hear. You'll feel 20 hertz before you'll hear it. And then about the middle of the mids is about 500 hertz, and then the high is 20,000 or 20 kilohertz. And when you're adjusting your EQ, you have frequencies like 80 hertz on the dial, and that is about where that sound or that frequency is going to be at. And you'll see 1 kilohertz on there as well. For instance, this could be what the microphone is sounding something like. This is if you could take a slice of every part of that frequency and put it all together, this is what it would look like. And depending on what your room is, every room is a little different. Just like when you're singing in the bathroom and you're taking a shower and you're singing and you say, wow, I really sound great here, but when I go somewhere else, I sound different. Well, a room has a big difference in what you sound like, and same thing with a microphone. When you're singing into a microphone, depending on what kind of room the walls are made of, or how big the room is, how tall the ceilings are, that all will determine what that microphone is going to sound like. And it might look something like this. And you'll say, well, I really want to hear some low frequencies, a little more bass into that microphone. And so you go over to the equalizer and turn that low frequency up. And it would come up just a little bit more, just to give you that depth, that little low frequency. And that's what you're doing, you're adding. You see here, this is at 0, +5, +10, +15. Same thing on your knob. The knob, when you turn that up, you'll see some of them will have +12, some will say +15, and it'll have those settings on that dial. And you turn that up, that's what you're doing. You're turning up at that frequency, like that low frequency is 80, and that's where it's going to start to bubble up and pull that low frequency out. Same thing if you're having some feedback problems. And say, for instance, on a cordless microphone, like a lapel microphone, a lot of times they'll see a peak that's coming out at about 1.5, 2 kilohertz. You'll see it has a very high peak, and you want to take that out. So you go to your mid-frequency knob and turn you find that mid-frequency about 1.5 kilohertz or wherever that is, and then slowly pull that down. And when you're up turning this knob, here it is, +15 or -15 at this particular frequency where you're having the trouble at, and so you just pull it down to like a -10. And it might only get down because you had such a peak, it took a lot just to get that frequency out. And that's basically what the EQ knobs are doing. It's taking that frequency, the sound waves that are coming through that channel, and shaping it and making it sound the way you want it to sound. Lapel microphones are notorious for feedback, especially in that high mid-frequency range. You'll see a lot of peaks up in there. And this is where the EQ really helps, by pulling those frequencies out and smoothing out those feedback issues. And we'll talk more about the EQ later. The pan knob adjusts which side of the stereo spectrum you want this particular channel to be, either left or right, even or odd. Let me explain the pan knobs and the assignment buttons along with the sub-bus mix, because they work together. Assignment buttons work together with the pan knob. Now, this particular soundboard has assignment buttons for sub-bus 1, 2, 3, 4, and left and right. We have 4 sub-buses. The sub-bus 1, sub-bus 2, sub bus 3, sub bus 4. And then we also have, of course, the left and right. Now, you might not have a soundboard with any assignment buttons at all. If that's the case, then all your signal will go to either left or right. And you just have to pan the pan knob to left or right to split the signal if you want that. But leave it in the middle and you'll get it both left and right. Let me give you an example of how to use assignment buttons. Here, if I push 1, 2, and this is a lead vocal, and you want to send all your lead vocals to sub bus 1, it means you pan your pan knob to the left, or that would be your odd, and all your backup vocals to number 2, sub bus 2, that would be panned over to the right. And when we move the sub bus fader up and down, it would be like moving these all at one time. Moving down the channel strip. The next feature depends on what type of soundboard you have, the mute button. And what this does basically mutes the entire channel strip. Here's an example of different uses for the mute button. You can use it when plugging in an instrument. You get that pop to speakers, push the mute button, and it'll get rid of that. It's also a fast way to find a channel that has a problem like feedback or some unknown noise. Start clicking the mute button and you'll eventually narrow it down to find that noise. Also, if you've got a speaker using a lapel mic and it has to cough, or possibly giving a hug like during a wedding, you can get rid of that noise by muting the channel. And then when they're done, unmute it quickly and your congregation won't be distracted. Although they say that since the invention of the mute button, it's been much easier to sleep in church. Regardless, it's still a great tool, and use the mute button whenever you can. Some soundboards even have mute groups, where you can assign one button to mute a bunch of different channels. Like this: drums, check. Instruments, check. Vocals, check. Cordless, check. Pretty cool. After the mute button is the solo, or PFL, pre-fader listen button. This button allows you to listen to that one channel all by itself. Most importantly, it's used to set the channel sensitivity or gain. Using the solo button and some headphones, you can find that one singer that's singing a little off key. Or if you hear a buzz or any kind of noise through the speakers, use the PFL or solo button to find that problem channel. The PFL or solo button and a good set of headphones can really make a difference in the quality of your mixes. We'll be using the solo button more during the mixing portion of this DVD. Finally, we come to the fader or slider. This is the volume for the channel. The higher this goes, the more volume this channel gets sent to the main outputs, or a bus channel. The main faders control the overall level of the sound system. Depending on the kind or soundboard you have, you might have one fader that controls both left and right, or two individual left and right faders, or even a third mono fader. Whatever the case may be, bring them up to 0 or unity. Some boards will ask for a -3 setting, and if that's the case, you'll have to then set it to the manufacturer's suggested level. You don't want to be moving the mains up and down. For an example, I see a lot of this happening. People initially, when they have a loud sound coming out of their soundboard, will bring the mains down. Don't do that. If you notice here that with the mains up in their normal position, you can't hear anything that's coming out of the CD channel, even though there's a signal. Only when you bring up the CD channel fader do you hear the music on the channel. If your system volume is too loud, find the channel that's too loud and bring it down. Don't bring the mains down. Leave them in its normal position. In an emergency, such as feedback, and you're not sure what channel it is, you might bring the mains down, but make it a habit to adjust the volume issues at the individual channel fader. Well, we've learned the basics of the soundboard. Let's move on to cables and connections.